Maya Rodriguez had exactly three things going for her in the vast emptiness of space. A talent for fixing things that shouldn't be fixable, a mouth that got her in trouble with alarming regularity, and the dubious honor of being the only maintenance tech willing to work on the rustiest cargo hauler in the Outer Rim. The ship's official name was the Steadfast Horizon, but everyone called it the Rusty Bucket, and honestly, that was being generous. Another day, another space toilet that's decided to revolt against basic physics, Maya muttered, pulling herself out of a maintenance shaft that smelled like a combination of ozone and regret. Her coveralls were stained with about 17 different types of alien lubricants, none of which were supposed to be purple, and her dark hair had escaped its ponytail in a way that suggested she'd been electrocuted by a friendly lightning bolt. Captain Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system with all the enthusiasm of a man announcing his own funeral. "Rodriguez, we're docking at Kepler Station in 20 minutes. Try not to break anything important while we're there." "Define important," Maya called back, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "Because the coffee machine is making that noise again, and I'm pretty sure it's planning something." The Rusty Bucket shuddered as it approached the massive space station, and Maya could practically hear the hull plates complaining about the maneuver. Kepler Station was one of those neutral trading posts that existed in the weird space between human and alien territories, where the coffee was terrible, the prices were worse, and you could buy literally anything if you knew which dock to visit and how many credits to slide under the table. Maya had been working cargo runs for 3 years now, and she'd learned that space was exactly like the brochures had promised: vast, mysterious, and full of wonder. What the brochures hadn't mentioned was that 90% of that wonder involved fixing broken things in cramped spaces, while various species argued about shipping manifests in languages that sounded like someone gargling gravel. As the ship settled into its docking clamps with a sound like a giant metal accordion being strangled, Maya grabbed her toolkit and headed for the airlock. The station's artificial gravity kicked in with a slight lurch that made her stomach do a little dance, and she found herself standing in the main concourse of Kepler Station, surrounded by the controlled chaos of interstellar commerce. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Not bad, exactly, but definitely not human. It was like someone had mixed cinnamon with ozone and a hint of something that might have been lavender, if lavender grew on a planet with 3 suns and a serious attitude problem. And then she saw them. The Vortac were impossible to miss, mainly because they were roughly the size of small buildings and covered in what looked like the galaxy's most luxurious fur coat. They moved through the station with a grace that seemed to defy their massive size, their large eyes taking in everything with the patient wisdom of a species that had probably been trading goods since before humans figured out fire was useful for more than just keeping warm. Maya watched one of them carefully arrange a display of what looked like crystallized music and couldn't help but grin. "Well," she said to herself, "this should be interesting." Maya had exactly 2 hours before the Rusty Bucket finished its supply run, which meant she had exactly 2 hours to find something that resembled decent coffee, and maybe pick up one of those weird alien snacks that tasted like childhood memories and regret. The station's marketplace was a maze of stalls and shops that seemed to have been designed by someone who thought straight lines were a suggestion rather than a requirement. She wandered past a stall selling what looked like bottled Starlight, another offering insurance policies for your soul, and a third that appeared to be staffed by a sentient cloud of purple smoke with excellent customer service skills. The Vortac seemed to run most of the food vendors, their massive paws surprisingly delicate as they handled goods that would have required tweezers for human fingers. "Excuse me, small worn one," rumbled a voice that sounded like distant thunder wrapped in velvet. Maya looked up to see a Vortac merchant whose fur was streaked with silver, indicating either advanced age or a really unfortunate encounter with a paint sprayer. "You seek the bitter brown liquid of your people, yes?" "If by bitter brown liquid you mean coffee that doesn't taste like it was filtered through a gym sock, then absolutely," Maya replied, trying not to crane her neck too much. The Vortac was easily 8 feet tall, and that was just his shoulders. The merchant's eyes crinkled in what Maya hoped was amusement. "3 stalls down, ask for bento. He makes the least offensive version for human palates." Maya was about to thank the friendly giant when she heard it, a sound that transcended species barriers and spoke to something primal in every sentient being's brain. It was the sound of a child crying, and it was coming from somewhere nearby. She followed the sound through the crowd, dodging between the legs of various aliens who seemed to be engaged in the universal activity of arguing about prices. The crying was getting louder, and Maya could hear the distinctive warbling tone that meant this wasn't a human child. She found him huddled behind a stack of cargo containers, and Maya's heart immediately did that thing where it forgot to beat for a second. The little Vorthak cub was maybe 3 feet tall, covered in fluffy golden fur that was matted with tears, and his large eyes were filled with the kind of terror that only came from being very small and very lost in a very big place. "Hey there, little guy," Maya said softly, crouching down to his level. "You okay?" The cub looked up at her with eyes that were far too large for his face, and let out another wail that could have shattered crystal. Maya didn't speak Vorthak, but she didn't need to. Universal kid language was pretty much the same everywhere, and this one was clearly having the worst day of his short life. "Where's your family, buddy?" Maya asked, looking around for any sign of frantic adult Vorthak. The marketplace continued its chaotic dance around them, but nobody seemed to have noticed one small, terrified cub. That's when she heard the mechanical whine. Maya's head snapped up just in time to see a cargo loader, one of those massive automated machines that moved freight around the station, come careening around the corner with all the grace of a drunk elephant. Its sensors were clearly malfunctioning because it was heading straight for the cargo containers where the little cub was hiding. And the cub, frozen in terror, wasn't moving. Maya's brain did that thing where it skipped all the sensible steps like risk assessment and self-preservation and jumped straight to action. She lunged forward, scooping up the little Vorthok just as the cargo loaders slammed into the containers with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. The impact sent Maya flying backward. The cub clutched protectively against her chest. She hit the deck hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the fall, and heard something that might have been a bone deciding to take an unscheduled vacation from its usual location. The last thing she saw before the world went fuzzy around the edges was a crowd of Vorthak adults rushing toward them, their faces filled with an expression that Maya's pain-addled brain couldn't quite interpret. But if she had to guess, it looked something like awe. Maya woke up to the sound of what she could only describe as a meditation gong, being played by someone who really wanted to make sure she was awake. Her shoulder felt like it had been used as a chew toy by a particularly enthusiastic space kraken, and there was a distinct possibility that her left arm was no longer speaking to the rest of her body. "Ah, the brave one awakens," rumbled a voice that sounded like distant earthquakes having a polite conversation. Maya opened her eyes to find herself in what was clearly the station's medical bay, staring up at a Vorthok whose fur was streaked with elaborate patterns that probably meant something important in their culture. Either that, or he'd had a very artistic accident with a paintbrush. "Please tell me the little guy is okay," Maya croaked, her voice sounding like she'd been gargling with asteroid dust. The Vorthak's large eyes widened in what Maya was starting to recognize as their version of surprise. "The cub Pip is unharmed thanks to your sacrifice. I am Elder Grondak, and I must tell you, small brave one, that what you have done is beyond our ability to repay." Maya tried to sit up, winced, and decided that horizontal was probably her best option for the foreseeable future. "Look, I just did what anyone would do. Kid was in danger, I helped. Pretty standard stuff, really." Grondek's expression shifted to something that might have been confusion, if confusion could be expressed through facial fur that defied several laws of physics. "Standard, you threw yourself into mortal peril to save a cub that was not of your blood, not of your pack, not even of your species. This is the highest virtue in all of Vorthak culture." "Highest virtue," Maya repeated, because apparently her brain was still running on half power. "I just didn't want to see a kid get hurt." "Precisely," Grondek said, and his voice carried the weight of someone delivering news that was going to change everything. "Among the Vorthok, there is no greater honor than to risk one's life for the protection of cubs. It is the cornerstone of our civilization, the measure by which all other actions are judged. What you did today has never been done by an outsider. You have become something we have no word for in your language." Maya had a sinking feeling that was only partially related to her injuries. What kind of something? "A cub guardian. A protector of the innocent, a living embodiment of our most sacred values." Grundok leaned forward, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both reverence and excitement. "The entire Vorthok community on this station witnessed your act of selfless courage. Word is already spreading to the Homeworld." "Word is spreading," Maya repeated slowly, because sometimes, when the universe decided to play a practical joke on you, the best response was to make sure you understood exactly how screwed you were. "Indeed. The Council of Elders wishes to honor you. There will be ceremonies, tributes, perhaps even a statue erected in your likeness." Grondok's enthusiasm was growing with each word, and Maya was starting to understand how mountains felt right before an avalanche. "A statue," she said. "A magnificent statue. Possibly several. The cubs of our homeworld will learn your name, alongside the great heroes of our past. Grandak was practically vibrating with joy now, which was impressive considering he was roughly the size of a small building. Maya closed her eyes and tried to process this information. She'd saved a kid from getting squished by a rogue cargo loader, and now an entire alien civilization wanted to treat her like some kind of saint. She'd heard of cultural misunderstandings before, but this was like accidentally becoming the Pope because you'd helped an old lady cross the street. Elder Grandak, she said carefully, I think there might be some confusion here. I'm not a hero. I'm just a maintenance tech who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Grandak's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. Ah, the modesty of the truly great. This only confirms what we already know. You are indeed worthy of the highest honors our people can bestow. Maya opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Something told her that arguing with a several thousand-year-old alien culture about their fundamental values was probably not going to end well for anyone involved. So, she said instead, what happens now? Grandak's eyes crinkled with what Maya was learning to recognize as Vortak happiness. Now, brave Maya Rodriguez, you become a legend. Maya had always prided herself on being able to handle whatever the universe threw at her, but she was starting to suspect that the universe had developed a serious grudge and was now actively trying to mess with her life. The invitation to visit the Vorthok homeworld had seemed simple enough when Elder Grandak presented it. A quick ceremony, maybe a fancy dinner, shake a few paws, and then back to her comfortable life of fixing broken things on a ship that barely qualified as spaceworthy. What she hadn't expected was to step off the transport shuttle onto a planet where her face was literally carved into the side of a mountain. Is that supposed to be me? Maya asked, staring up at the massive stone visage that gazed down at the spaceport with an expression of noble determination that she was pretty sure she'd never actually worn. The statue was at least 300 feet tall, and whoever had carved it had taken some serious artistic liberties with her jawline. The artisans worked through the night to complete it in time for your arrival, Grandak explained proudly. They consulted the security footage from the station to ensure accuracy. Security footage, Maya repeated, because apparently her brain had decided that the best way to deal with this situation was to just echo everything back like a confused parrot. Right, of course. The crowd that had gathered to greet her was unlike anything Maya had ever seen. Thousands of Vorthak filled the plaza, all of them staring at her with an expression that fell somewhere between religious awe and the look people got when they met their childhood heroes. Cubs perched on their parents' shoulders, pointing at her with tiny paws and making excited chirping sounds that needed no translation. Maya, 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 they chanted, and the sound echoed off the buildings like thunder. Someone had apparently taught them to pronounce her name, which was both touching and mildly terrifying. This is completely insane, Maya whispered to herself, but in the general din of several thousand aliens celebrating her existence, nobody seemed to hear her. Elder Grandak gestured to the crowd with obvious pride. The entire population of our capital city has come to see you. We have declared today a planetary holiday, the Festival of the Brave, Small One. You named a holiday after me? Maya's voice cracked slightly. I was here for 5 minutes. Time is irrelevant in the face of true heroism, Grandak replied solemnly. Come, there is much to show you. The tour that followed was like something out of a fever dream. Maya was led through streets lined with banners bearing her likeness, past shops selling action figures that looked suspiciously like her in heroic poses, and through a plaza where someone had erected a fountain featuring a sculpture of her diving to save little Pip from the cargo loader. The water came out of the cargo loader's exhaust ports, which Maya had to admit was actually pretty clever. The cubs have been especially excited, Grandak explained as they walked past a playground where young Vorthak were playing a game that seemed to involve one of them pretending to be Maya, while the others played various roles in the rescue. 743 cubs born since your heroic act have been named Maya. We may need to start using numbers to distinguish them. Maya stopped walking. 743? The births have been unusually frequent since news of your deeds spread, Grandak said happily. The joy of having a living cub guardian has inspired many families to expand their broods. The Population Council estimates we may see a 20% increase in births this cycle. I've caused a baby boom, Maya said faintly, on an alien planet, by accident. Your influence extends far beyond mere inspiration, Grandak continued, apparently oblivious to Maya's growing panic. The Council of Elders has voted to restructure our entire education system around the principles you demonstrated. Courage, selflessness, and protection of the innocent will now be the core curriculum for all young Vorthak. They passed a group of adult Vorthak who immediately dropped to their knees when they saw Maya, pressing their foreheads to the ground in what was clearly some kind of religious gesture. Maya tried to wave them back up, but they seemed to interpret this as some kind of blessing, and began making happy rumbling sounds. "Please tell me they're not worshipping me," Maya said weakly. "Not worship, precisely," Grondak replied thoughtfully. "More like profound spiritual admiration, combined with deep cultural reverence and just a touch of holy fear." "That's worship," Maya said. "That's literally worship." "Perhaps," Grondak admitted. "But it is worship well earned." As they entered the city center, Maya found herself face to face with the most elaborate temple she'd ever seen. The architecture was stunning, all flowing curves and crystal spires that seemed to catch the light of the dual suns and throw it back in rainbow patterns. What made it particularly surreal was the fact that it was clearly dedicated to her. "The Temple of the Tiny Protector," Grondak announced with obvious pride. "Construction began the day after your heroic deed. The faithful come here to meditate on the virtues you embodied and to pray for the strength to follow your example." Maya stared at the temple, then at the crowds of Vorthak streaming in and out of it, then at the massive golden statue of herself that stood at the entrance, depicted in the act of catching a falling cub while radiating some kind of divine light. "I think I need to sit down," she said. Maya found herself in what Grondak called the Chamber of Reflection, which was apparently the Vorthak equivalent of a VIP lounge, if VIP lounges were designed by someone who thought comfort should be measured in cubic feet and furnished entirely with cushions that could double as small buildings. She was nursing something that tasted like liquid starlight mixed with the concept of happiness, while trying to process the fact that she'd accidentally become the central figure in an alien religion. "Of Elder Grondak," she said carefully, "I need to understand something. Why is protecting cubs so important to your people? I mean, every species protects their young, but this seems like something more." Grondak's massive frame settled into a cushion that could have housed a small family, and his expression grew serious in a way that made Maya realize she was about to hear something that would put everything into perspective. 300 years ago, he began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient sorrow, "our homeworld was dying. The great plague of Kethmore swept through our population like fire through dry grass, but it had a particular cruelty. It targeted the young first. The cubs whose immune systems could not fight what their elders could barely survive." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How many?" 97% of our cubs died within 2 seasons, Grondak said quietly. "An entire generation. Gone." The survivors numbered fewer than 10,000 individuals across the entire planet. "We went from a thriving civilization of billions to a handful of scattered communities, all of them grieving parents who had lost everything that mattered." "That's horrible," Maya whispered, and suddenly the elaborate statues and temples didn't seem quite so absurd. "The plague burned itself out, as plagues do, but the damage was done. We were a dying species and we knew it. Our birth rates plummeted, not from biological necessity but from despair. Who would choose to bring a child into a world where children died?" Grondak's large eyes were distant, seeing something Maya couldn't imagine. "For 50 years, we barely reproduced at all. The population continued to decline." Maya was starting to understand, but she let him continue. "It was then that the Council of Elders made a decision that would reshape our entire civilization. They declared that the protection of cubs, any cubs, would become our highest virtue. Not just our own young, but any child of any species who needed protection. They reasoned that if we could not save our own, perhaps we could find meaning in saving others." "And it worked?" Maya asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. "It gave us purpose," Grondak said simply. "A reason to continue existing. Our birth rates slowly recovered, not because we were less afraid, but because we had something to live for again. The protection of innocence became our holy calling, our path back from the brink of extinction." Maya set down her drink, her hand trembling slightly. "So when I saved Pip, you demonstrated without knowing our history, without understanding our culture, without any expectation of reward, the very principle that saved our species from extinction. You risked your life for a child who was not your own, and you did it instinctively, as if protecting cubs was simply what intelligent beings do." The weight of what he was saying settled on Maya like a physical force. "You think I represent some kind of universal truth about protecting children?" "I think," Grondak said carefully, "that you represent the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there is something in the universe that makes beings want to protect the innocent. That it's not just a Vorthak quirk born of tragedy, but something deeper, something that exists in humans too. Maya stared at the ornate ceiling of the chamber, trying to process this information. And that's why you built the temple, and the statues, and named all those cubs after me. The temple was built because you gave us hope, Grondak said. Hope that we chose correctly when we made protection of cubs our highest virtue. Hope that there are others in the universe who share that instinct. Hope that when the next crisis comes, we won't face it alone. But I'm just one person, Maya protested. I can't represent all of humanity. Can't you? Grondak asked gently. In that moment when you saw Pip in danger, you didn't think about diplomacy or cultural exchange, or the implications of your actions. You just saw a child who needed help, and you helped. If that's not representative of your species' potential, then what is? Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking about every maintenance call she'd ever answered, every problem she'd ever fixed, every time she'd helped someone simply because they needed help. We do tend to be pretty good at fixing things, she admitted. Even when those things are not your responsibility, even when helping might hurt you, even when no one would blame you for walking away. Grondak's voice carried a warmth that transcended species barriers. That is why you are our legend, Maya Rodriguez. Not because you are perfect, but because you are proof that the instinct to protect exists beyond our own species. Maya felt tears she hadn't realized were forming, beginning to run down her cheeks. So what happens now? Do I live in a temple and dispense wisdom? Because I have to tell you, most of my wisdom involves proper wrench maintenance, and the correct way to swear at a stubborn coupling. Grondak's rumbling laugh filled the chamber. Now you do whatever you choose to do. But you do it knowing that somewhere in the universe there are people who believe that protecting the innocent is the highest calling, and that you help them remember why that matters. Maya wiped her eyes and looked at the massive alien, who had accidentally become one of the most important people in her life. I think I understand now. This was never about me being special. It was about proving that caring about each other is special. Precisely, Grondak said, and Maya could hear the smile in his voice. And now, perhaps, you can help us teach that lesson to others. The great assembly of the Vorthak was exactly as impressive as Maya had feared it would be. Thousands of aliens filled an amphitheater that had been carved directly into the side of a mountain, their fur rippling in waves of color that seemed to shift with their collective mood. Maya stood at the center podium, looking up at more ice than she'd ever seen in one place, and tried to remember that she was supposed to be inspiring, not terrifying. So, she began, her voice amplified by technology that made her sound like she was speaking directly into each individual's ear. Apparently I'm a legend now, which is weird because last week my biggest accomplishment was getting the coffee machine to stop making that noise that sounded like a dying space whale. A ripple of what she hoped was laughter ran through the crowd. Maya had spent the last 3 days trying to figure out what to say to an entire civilization that had built their recovery around the principle she'd accidentally demonstrated, and she'd finally realized that the only thing she could do was be honest. Elder Grondak told me about your history, she continued, about the plague, about the cubs you lost, about how you rebuilt your entire society around protecting children, and I have to tell you, that's not just impressive, that's absolutely incredible. Most species would have given up, but you didn't. You took the worst thing that could happen to a people and turned it into the foundation for something better. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. Maya took a deep breath and continued. But here's the thing about what I did on that station. I didn't save Pip because I'm special, or because I'm particularly heroic, or because I understood the deep cultural significance of cub protection in Vorthak society. I saved him because he was a kid in trouble, and that's what you do when you see a kid in trouble. You help. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. The truth is, I think most humans would have done the same thing. We're kind of hardwired to protect children, even when they're not our own, even when they're not our species. It's not because we're better than anyone else. It's just because that's what intelligent beings do. We look out for each other. Maya could see nods and gestures of agreement throughout the crowd. She was hitting the right notes. You made me into a legend because you needed proof that your values were universal, that the choice you made to rebuild your civilization around protection and care was the right one. Well, I'm here to tell you that you don't need proof. You never did. The fact that you made that choice, that you chose hope over despair, that you chose to protect others when you couldn't protect your own, that makes you the legends. The crowd was beginning to stir, a low rumble of approval building in the amphitheater. But I also want to tell you something that might be even more important, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. You don't need to be special to be a hero. You don't need to be chosen or blessed or have your face carved into a mountain. You just need to care about each other. Every single one of you has the capacity to be exactly as heroic as you think I am, because heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about trying to help when help is needed. She gestured to the crowd, encompassing thousands of individuals. You want to honor what I did? Then go out there and do it yourselves. See someone who needs help? Help them. See a child in danger? Protect them. See a problem that needs fixing? Fix it. Don't wait for someone else to be the hero. Be the hero. The rumble in the crowd was growing louder, more enthusiastic. Maya could feel the energy building. And here's the really beautiful part, she said, her voice carrying across the amphitheater like a benediction. When you do that, when you choose to help and protect and care, you're not just being heroic. You're being exactly what your species chose to become when you faced extinction and chose hope instead of despair. You're living up to the best version of yourselves. The crowd erupted. The sound was like nothing Maya had ever heard, a symphony of approval that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. Thousands of Vorthak were on their feet, their voices raised in a chant that needed no translation. Maya stood at the podium, overwhelmed by the response, and realized that something fundamental had just shifted. The crowd wasn't chanting her name anymore. They were chanting something else, something that sounded like a promise, like a commitment, like a battle cry. Grondak appeared at her elbow, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both pride and amusement. "Do you know what they're saying?" he asked. Maya shook her head, still stunned by the response. "They're saying we are all heroes," Grondak explained. "You've just given an entire civilization permission to be as brave as they've always had the capacity to be." 2 weeks later, Maya was back on the rusty bucket, up to her elbows in a particularly stubborn fusion coupling that had apparently decided to stage a revolt against the laws of physics. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system with his usual enthusiasm level of mildly irritated. "Rodriguez, we're getting some kind of priority transmission from the Vorthak Homeworld, something about a cultural exchange program." Maya grinned and wiped her hands on her coveralls. "Tell them I'll call them back when I'm done fixing this coupling, Cap. Some things never change." But as she worked, she found herself humming an old song and thinking about the letter she'd received from Elder Grondak that morning. The Vorthak had apparently taken her speech to heart in a big way. Crime rates on their homeworld had dropped by 60% as citizens took it upon themselves to protect and help each other. Educational initiatives focused on practical heroism were spreading to other worlds. 3 different species had requested cultural exchanges to learn about the Vorthak philosophy of universal care. And perhaps most importantly, Pip had sent her a drawing of the 2 of them standing together, both of them smiling, both of them labeled hero. Maya was just putting the finishing touches on the coupling when Chief Engineer Lasaud Park stuck her head around the corner. "Hey Maya, you might want to see this. We just got word from the Centauri colonies. Apparently Jenkins saved some Aquarian younglings from a collapsing mineshaft last week, and now they want to build a shrine in his honor." Maya paused, wrench in hand, and started to laugh. "Let me guess, they think he's some kind of legendary protector figure." "Something like that," Lucy said, grinning. "And Thompson apparently helped deliver a Rigelian birth pod during that storm on Kepler 442, and now they want to name a moon after her." Maya shook her head, still chuckling. "Looks like humans have a habit of accidentally becoming legends just by being decent people." "Weird how that works," Lisa agreed. "Almost like being helpful is some kind of universal virtue or something." Maya tightened the final bolt on the coupling and felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. Outside the ship, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them entire civilizations were learning that heroism wasn't about being special. It was about caring enough to try. "Yeah," Maya said, gathering up her tools. "Weird how that works." The rusty bucket hummed around them, carrying its crew of accidental legends toward whatever adventure awaited them next. And Maya Rodriguez, maintenance technician and inadvertent savior of an alien civilization, went back to fixing the things that needed fixing. Because that's what heroes do.